with, or the concept that you're trying to visualization, our brains can process visual cues 60,000 times faster than words or text. And for those folks who are into the tech world here, so we deal a lot with natural language processing, right? So the human version of a fast-tracked hyper processing in terms of natural language processing would be visually looking at things or visually imagining things, which, in other words, might literally be represented in text or word concept, right? So we use a metaphor roughly for native English speakers. The research says that roughly every 20 words there's a metaphor that's been used, and we'll see the contextualization of such metaphors in different geographies and different types of native English speakers and people who have adopted to speak in the English language. So, and the third and key important fact of that metaphors contribute into daily communication is the tangible clarity it can offer. So they often, as I mentioned earlier, it can break down complex concepts into simple, digestible tidbits. So it can turn abstract ideas into solid objects that remain in your brain. If I ask you at this very moment not to think about an elephant, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? You are thinking about an elephant. It's inevitable. So it can be as powerful as that, right? So in one word, I want you to probably put it in the chat, or you can turn on your mic and you can share this with us. How does public speaking make you feel? Just think of one word which would sort of form as your response to the question, how does public speaking make you feel? Got quite a bit happening. Yes, elephant. Happy, anxious, nervous, empowered, excited. Right. Some really interesting one-word answers here, which is very relatable, uncomfortable, exciting. Receiving it would be inspired. Doing it would be nervous. Oh, same here, Kelly. Same here. Elated. That's interesting. Yeah. That's a word that I don't see often. Used to only read it in poetry back in the day. Love it. Alive. That's interesting. Well, yes, we have several interesting answers here in the chat about what public speaking makes one feel. Now we look at now this is a very I wouldn't even say brief, but it's in a nutshell, it's a one word answer describing how the instance of public speaking makes you feel, right? So now we'll explore other toolkits which will help us explain the same things in not as much as an abstract concept, but something that you can picture in your mind vividly. So, metaphor in itself is a subset of something we call as figure of speech, right? So there are different kinds of figure of speech. We'll see a few instances of those in the next coming slides. So it is essentially from the package of figures of speech, and the figurative language in itself has a very powerful emphasis in the sense that it can embed and burn the thought into your mind, which makes it much more easier for the person or the concept that you're dealing with to connect, as a matter of fact. So it helps you clarify the abstract, as we've seen earlier. It serves as a hook, and it also helps in evoking your emotions. Say, for example, as I've added here, there's several examples here, so I don't think I will be touching on all of it, but we will be touching on two or three in this slide. When one feels sad and they express their feeling as I am feeling sad, and when the same person expresses the same feeling of sadness by saying, I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of sorrow, the emphasis and the depth of the emotion has a very different ring to it, as you can imagine. And on the right, we have style and rhythm. It gives, so when Muhammad Ali's boxing style was discussed, there are so many paragraphs or detailed long forms you can use to explain the style of boxing and the legwork Muhammad Ali uses. But Ali himself and other commentators would rather stick to this catchy phrase, which goes like float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. So that makes you think, when you read the line float or hear the line float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, it literally makes you think what a butterfly floats like or flies like. It hovers over a place, and then how do you sting like a bee, and how you combine both, and then you can equate it to how Muhammad Ali moves in the ring. So that's a very beautiful way of looking at things, and that sort of etches that very notion of movement and um, the signature style that Ali brings to boxing. So this is one interesting way of discussing or describing the same thing in which in other words would be a long form words which might run for a few sentences or perhaps a few paragraphs. We have something in the chat. Oh, I love that. Thanks, Alex. So, and also helps to create something I call as a memory anchor. So, it creates a mental picture, as I said earlier, and patterns that stick to you for a long time, oftentimes forever. So, sticky ideas act, and one nice, catchy, pun intended way of giving an example is sticky ideas act like burns on a sweater. So, are metaphors the only figure of speech available? Certainly not. So, there are a lot of different varieties of figure of speech that you'll encounter. You've got simile, which is basically comparing one thing to another, as brave as a lion is an example. Personification, which is basically personifying an inanimate object. In this instance, I've added the wind whispered. The wind is not a person, but the wind whispered is one way of describing how the breeze floats through the neighborhood or through some buildings. And very interesting thing, hyperbole, you hear it quite often in contemporary work settings. So it's usually an exaggeration, a hyperinflated exaggeration of something trivial or something simple. Say drowning in emails, especially when you have tons of emails to respond to. And we've got alliteration, which is basically a very repeating set of consonant sounds. Silver, sleek, sedan is one good example. And we have onomatopoeia, which is buzz, click, whoosh, meow, purr, and all this interesting subsets would fall under onomatopoeia. So most animal noises, impact, collision sounds could qualify as onomatopoeia. Drizzle, gurgle, those are all good examples of onomatopoeia. And we also have imagery, which, for instance, the citrus sunlight warmed the room. You find it in classical prose mostly, and even some contemporary literature try to use it, but not as much as you find in classical compositions. And obviously, symbolism, dove. Say you use an object or a symbol which signifies something, and you have olive leaves, that means peace. You have a dove that also, the symbol of a dove or a dove being mentioned, that stands for peace. There are other figures of speech too. I've just limited it to very few examples here, just to give you the wide portfolio of what comes under the umbrella of figures of speech. We also have something called as an oxymoron. We have something called as epithet. Oxymoron is something that sounds like complete opposites of each other. Say, for example, when I say small crowd, well, crowd's supposed to be a large gathering of people or larger demographic. A small crowd is in itself quite opposite to each other, but it still makes sense in the sense that it is a figure of speech and it is classified as an oxymoron. We're looking at deafening silence, which is quite interesting. Silence isn't loud enough to deafen you, but it's deafening silence. We're looking at cruel kindness, which is my favorite oxymoron, cruel kindness, and it's very poetic as well. And we have a few other interesting subsets of figures of speech. One called as epithet, which some of you might have fans of literature and I mean people who love reveling in English language also would understand. Sometimes it's elusive, sometimes it's descriptive. If you've read the classics, the mythology of mythologies, you'd come across the term gray-eyed Athena. We also have the Big Apple, which is an epithet which means New York City, the City of Lights for Paris. We've got a few other examples here. Richard the Lionheart. So instead of actually telling the name of the person, you actually describe what the person stood for. And if you've read Homer's Odyssey, you know wine dark sea. That's my favorite in Homer's Odyssey. That's for the literary one. Or instead of Alexander the Great, you use these are the positive versions of epithet. There are other negative versions of epithet. We're not going to dive into this, especially given the focus is on metaphors. So I'm going to limit that to today, but we do have a nice worksheet for you, which would cover a lot of interesting stuff. We will be passing that on to you shortly. So why the focus on metaphors? So that is the only tool that we wanted to focus for this evening session. So keep it focused and narrow on one particular topic, and then perhaps expand on that later. So metaphors help you with the versatility in which you communicate speeches, be it formal or informal. It could be in your workplace setting. It could be a persuasive speech. It could be a leadership speech. It could be some motivational speech or even ceremonial. So it always makes an interesting part of your vocal and articulatory arsenal, I would say, in the sense that it engages your audience and it makes them think as opposed to just listening to a dry speech which just fills with words and doesn't let the audience to think about something or gives them a visual takeaway. It also amplifies if in this case if you're presenting slides, it amplified slides, and if you're using a prop for your speech, then possibly the props also could be naturally amplified, and they're going to remember that moment for a long time to come. Um, and as we've discussed earlier, the brain also processes figures of speech, particularly metaphors, at a faster rate than just digesting dry words, which comes in handy. So we've spoken so long about a lot about metaphors and figures of speech. But what exactly is a metaphor? So, metaphor helps you establish a direct comparison of something that you're trying to describe or talk about by stating one thing as another thing. Um, so, I've broken it down here on the left side of the box here, the leftmost box here. So, it is as a matter of fact, a direct assertion of something that you're trying to explain, right? So time is a thief is one good example or one good way of putting it. And a very good example of what serves as a metaphor. It doesn't just compare, so it equates. So the qualities of the thieves include stealth, stealing, robbery, or burglary, as you might say. So, and that is directly correlated with time. So we're essentially equating one thing with another. So time is equated to thief, and hence we say time is a thief. If you're looking at another figure of speech, which is on the middle box here, the center box, simile. So simile, what it does is it uses like or as in terms of comparing. So metaphor literally has a direct assertion to it. Whereas if you compare simile, which is its nearest sister in the figure of speech family, it uses is, as, or like as a comparative system. So it acknowledges separation between the two concepts, but it makes it softer and quite literal actually. And then we have analogy, so which establishes logical relationship between two things. It's the same concept. So we're looking at a good example here. Time steals moments just as a thief steals gold. So that adds a different connotation and a different ring to it, but it does the same job. But it is classified as an analogy here. So it explains how the comparison works, and it's often a long form version of things, and it's used for logical arguments rather than poetic impact. So if you're a lawyer or a barrister, I mean, I think it might come in handy to convince your proposition in court. But if you're trying to give a civic speech, I believe metaphors are the tool to go with. And our brains love metaphors, as we discussed earlier, 60,000 times faster processing of visual cues as compared to words and text. And it also has an emotional resonance to it. So, taste metaphors like she's sweet engages, say you encounter a person who's very kind, caring, and always there for you. So, there are different ways of putting it. But when you say she is sweet, it actually engages the limbic systems, which is in the emotional centers of your brain. So, it's more than what sees the eye, the impact of what a metaphor leaves, and it is clinically proven. It is a well researched neuroscience study. I just wanted to put it out there. Uh, right. So there are different types of metaphors in itself. So not to make it too complex, but if you can just break it down into three categories, it'll be visual, conceptual, and extended, right? So visual metaphor is usually a single image that carries instant meaning. So it breaks down a complex concept into a concrete object that stays in your mind. A very good example here is when you say our team is a set of puzzle pieces, unique alone, alone. Again, alone is repeated, forgive me, unique alone, but creating a complete picture together. So another way of putting it is our management is a house of cards, right? So or dog eats dog world essentially. So that way it could signify a lot of things for insiders and outsiders in different tones actually. And then you have conceptual metaphor using one familiar domain to understand another domain. So you normally use this when you're trying to frame how we think about a specific topic. Say, as we've seen in a previous example, time is money and leadership is navigation. So that makes you think, I mean, essentially puts a lot of complex concepts into one single sentence. That's how I look at it. And then you have something called as an extended metaphor. So a sustained theme that usually runs throughout the entire speech, right? That would qualify as an extended metaphor. So that usually creates a very coherent and cohesive narrative to a story that you're trying to convey or a concept that you're trying to explain. So a good example here is this project is a mountain climb. We are at base camp. The summit is visible, but the ascent requires rope teams. So I've highlighted mountain climb here, which is the extended metaphor. So usually in extended metaphor, when you state the section that qualifies as an extended metaphor, you usually follow through with an explanation. Hence the very notion of this term extended metaphor. So instead of just keeping it short and crisp like time is money, we start by saying this project is a mountain climb. We are at base camp now. The summit is visible, but the ascent requires rope teams. So, right. Where are we? Right, good to be on time. Great. So I wanted to add three prominent masterclass orators in my personal view, and I couldn't find any better than these three. Martin Luther King Jr., Steve Jobs, and Sir Winston Churchill. So each of these personalities have a very different uh, tonality, vocal variety, style, stage presence, and the way they connect with their audience. But I think it is undeniable that all of them do what a masterclass speaker is supposed to do, connect with audience, leave them a message to take away, and whatever message that they take away remains imprinted in their brain, in the mind for a long time to come. So how do they do it? They've also prominently and extensively used a lot of metaphors in their speeches. So if you look at Martin Luther King Jr., his famous line is, "In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check." So cash a check is a metaphor in itself, a bad check. So why it works? It works because it transforms a very abstract concept, as we've seen before, which is in the time justice and human rights, into a very tangible, relatable financial transactions, which everyday human beings could understand and relate with. Everyone knows the sting of a bounce check. So when you equate that with this, same analogy, right? Time is a thief, so to cash a check. So that actually resounds in people. It reverberates sort of in your mind and makes you think about things from a much more deeper perspective than simply saying, okay, so we have a human rights issue, we have a justice issue, we have a rights issue. And Barack Obama and Jacinda Ardern too, very persuasive. Yes, T. Lawrence, absolutely agree with you. They've got a very persuasive style of speech. And I think their vocal variety and tone also helps with that. Um, Moving on to the center square, we've got Steve Jobs. I've personally admired his stage presence. Sometimes it's what his presence on stage is very dynamic, and that comes first. And in my personal opinion, whatever he says comes after how his body language sort of conquers the stage. So he is a visionary, right? So he also uses metaphors, and his famous line is, "The computer is the most relatable tool we've ever come up with. It's a bicycle for our minds." And if you follow the speech, there's another interesting metaphor that he might have used too, especially when the iPod came out. So instead of saying this is how much MB or GB of songs that could be stored. I think he used an analogy that is very similar to um, these are these many songs in your pocket. And he took out the iPod and he showed it to the audience. So it actually has a very interesting case for reframing a story. So in this case, it reframes scary technology as a simple tool that amplifies human ability. Um, while making sure that it is not replacing anything that you already have. So that was the impact this particular statement using metaphor had. And then we have Winston Churchill and his very famous speech, multiple quotes. One I picked is from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended. So the Iron Curtain, if people are familiar with history, might allude to a very geopolitical, I wouldn't say jargon, but a terminology which has a lot of geopolitical scenario unfurling behind it. So why it works, it did work in that time, and I think this is a metaphor that will work even now, given how powerful this metaphor is. It creates a visual of an absolute separation, and it also signifies how opaque and impenetrable the situation was at that time, and it defined an entire era of history in just two words: Iron Curtain. And most history books have pretty much extensively used that word to describe the scenario during post World War II and Cold War era times. Right. Where are we? Practical application of metaphors. So this is where I need all of your help. It would really help me if you could turn on your mics during the session and profusely use the chat toolbox. So what we see now is the practical benefits of metaphors, not that we haven't seen in the previous examples, but we're going to see it essentially immersed because we're going to be interacting with each other. So we've got five. I mean, the entire insight that I want to give you here is people may forget your logic, but they rarely forget your pictures. So the idea is to paint a picture, pun intended, in their minds so that they have a clear takeaway of what you're offering, what you said, what your message is, and what you stand for. In different contexts, different things might come into the forefront, but you get the idea. So the fundamentally, when I try to deliver a social speech, I want it to be memorable. So I want to create sticky hooks that listeners can carry home. So your message should, what I call is, should be like a Velcro ball, not like a Teflon pan. Uh, I would like to say pun intended, but this is a metaphor. So persuade powerfully. So when I use an example like we are building a bridge, not a wall, that conveys a lot while using very succinct words in its brevity. Simplifying complexity, as we've seen earlier, it engages the audience, hook, as I was talking, and emotion as well. So grief comes in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes crushing. Poetic at the same time, it's very catchy. Right. So we do have something called as a metaphor toolkit, which took me painful amount of hours to compile. I'm going to add that in the, I think we can share files in the chat bar. Yes, I think we can. I'm going to add that file in there, and we're going to take 5 minutes to go through that file, if that is okay, Alex. Okay, give me one moment. I'm looking to navigate. Okay. Metaphor toolkit. I've uploaded USSR, Cold War. Terry Stubbs. Yes, that's correct, Terry. Um, metaphor spelling is wrong. Forgive me. It was all done in a hurry. Right. So I've can you confirm that you can see the file in the chat? Yeah, perfect. I want you to take a few minutes to have a look at the document. So we're not going to be using all of it today, but that is for you to use at your discretion after today's session. What I want you to do is go to page 4 to the section, the 10-step metaphor creation process. So there are 10 steps to creating a metaphor. well, 10 simple steps to create a metaphor. You can make it as complex as you want, but given we're dealing with metaphors and the whole point of breaking down complex concepts into simple uh, takeaways, I think using this simple 10-step metaphor creation process would come in handy. I would, let's, at 3:38, let's reconvene. And what I want to do when we reconvene is I want each one of you to contribute something to how you came up with a scenario in your mind and what sort of a metaphor you would like to use. Something that you've actually done in your personal lives, uh, professional lives also would come into consideration. But each one, if you can give me one example, I think that'd be very engaging, and I think everybody would have a clear takeaway uh, because I think we are a very linguistically and culturally different audience. So there's a lot of context to things and how we think about certain things. So I believe it's going to be very interesting when each one of us can share our personal stories of what sort of metaphors we've used in our daily lives. So let's reconvene at 3:38 sharp, and let's keep the chatter going. Yeah.
Peter, I think if anyone is ready, we can kick off, right?
We can kick off. So
Yeah,
I would, yeah, the whole notion of taking a break here is people go through these 10 steps and formulate and
yeah.
think about a few things. We're going to run through two or three more slides quickly, and then in the fourth slide, we'll actually enter into the discussion. So it gives them more context and there's also more information here. So this is a personal preference. So it might be different for different people. So let me just make sure it's the right slide. So the 10-step toolkit is just a visual representation of whatever you see in as words in the document. So again, pun intended, we're breaking it down into visuals here. So in terms of best practices in employing figures of speech, or in this particular example, metaphors, there are certain common pitfalls in solution that I personally consider. One is using dead cliches. You'd hear this metaphor low-hanging fruit in a lot of workplace settings, particularly. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. It is one of the most extensively abused metaphor, which has even lost its sense of meaning and impact. In my personal view, you don't have this is not a um, empirical perspective, but it's a personal view, low-hanging fruit. Everything is a low-hanging fruit in workplace scenarios these days. So if everything is a low-hanging fruit, then which is the lowest hanging fruit? Well, let's not get into that today, but we could probably have that conversation for a different day. So my personal take is I would avoid using the metaphor low-hanging fruit because it doesn't stand out and it's just too basic these days. And another personal metaphor that I would avoid is uh, just throwing a lot of metaphors together just to make a line sound very interesting, right? So mixed metaphor analogy is what I would use here. Let's not burn that bridge when we come to it. I think it's just too much, too much of anything. I think is not good. I mean, you can have a spoon of honey, but a bottle of honey a day is, I think, just overdoing it. My personal opinion. And my suggestion would be stick to context. If you're talking to techies, try to, use jargons or terminologies they would understand. If it's a family situation, try to use some context only your family members would know. For instance, I think a lot of people would have come up with that metaphor as well, which you would like to discuss in the next few minutes. We will see that as well. So the idea is to let it breathe and connect with the audience and use an analogy in the sense of a metaphor that they would be able to relate or connect with and keep it fresh. Say, for instance, I was talking about engineers and techies, right? So instead of saying think outside the box, let's say hacking the system, which is so in vogue today when you find wherever you find in, especially the tech settings, yeah, or even non-tech settings, given that AI is now being extensively used everywhere. Again, another topic for another day. Um, So this is the interactive session I was telling you about. So you can pick any topic, as Alex mentioned earlier. So we'll pick one person. You can share for a maximum of 90 seconds about what you feel about the metaphor and the area and the topic that you've picked. And so I've added some guidelines. You can either craft a fresh metaphor or you can use something that you've used in your personal settings and you can add a sensory detail to it if you want, or you could add another detail that you find interesting as well. And we can discuss that among others in this evening's presentation. So the floor is open. Anybody can. Oh, I see some chats coming up. My go-to is cream on a cake, on the cake. Oh yeah. That's interesting. Icing on top of the cake, cherry on top. Tonight's metaphor. My thoughts are calm before the storm. My- Typing my comments. That's interesting. And we have like thousand sharp beads piercing onto my body. I persist. I refuse to give up as the rain drenched me, soaking me wet, wet like my eyes. Okay, that's poetic and that's interesting. Peter, you're putting me on the spot. Tony. Wow, that is very interesting. Peter, you're putting me on the spot. Okay, that was very interesting. So no, that's very relatable too, right? To the scenario, contextual. It is fresh as well. Icing or diamond on the cake. Okay, that's interesting. We still have few more, a couple minutes we can spare on this. So you don't just have to put it in the text. You can also use the mic and you can share if you want. You're open to it. Joe, Sue, would you like to share some? Our love of cars is a hungry monster, devouring our cities, covering all with tar and danger. Ah, that's poetic. Unmoving like the barnacled anchor at the shipwreck site. Okay, that's good. Barnacles, a word that I haven't seen for a long time.
Peter, Loretta here.
Hi, Loretta.
How you doing? I really liked education is a passport to the future. That really resonated with me, and I think it's something can certainly put into many a speech
Yeah,
as we progress through our paths. I think, yeah, no, I really like that one.
that's a very interesting one, actually. Yeah,
Yeah, it does. It you do get that visual image of yeah, education is that passport. Like, yeah, no, it's great.
that's a very interesting one. Thanks for sharing that, Loretta. A
No
very
worries.
similar one is literature refines the soul.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, very, very similar. Same, almost the same meaning, but you get the idea. Yeah. We have wing here. Speaking, singing. Your voice carries your emotions. Your tone shapes your intention, and your body projects your conviction. That's an interesting one, right? Education keeps the brain purring. Ah, that's good. Purring. That's I would say that's an onomatopoeia, but a mixture of onomatopoeia and metaphor, which works. Interesting. Roadmap to your destination. That's a good one. Ah, that's a good one, especially in strategy presentations. Roadmap to your destination. This is our North Star in relation to CSP. Okay. What is CSP?
Club success plan.
Ah,
I
okay.
hope.
Sure. I hope so too. I mean, well, I believe the abbreviations and acronyms should be relevant to Toastmasters. It doesn't have to be, but too many acronyms to remember in my mind. A picture would help.
Awesome. Look, I'll give you one more person so that we can then go into concluding the session. So pick on anyone. You have a list of 24 people.
I can pick on anyone.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to make it. I'm going to pick on someone who would actually be glad to contribute, glad to be put on the spot. My job is full of acronyms. Sue, would you like to contribute?
She's
Okay.
off camera, so
Yeah.
have another go.
Terry, I see a hand up.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Terry.
It's a great idea. Very simple. It's a very complex idea. The great idea has great resonance in modern Greek history. It's the time when the small Greek kingdom in 1830 looked upon bringing in the hundreds of thousands of Greeks that lived outside of the small Greek state that lived in modern day Turkey. So and we got very close to realizing that in 1920, but by 1922, that all evaporated.
That's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Terry. I think we'll move on with a couple of slides and I'll hand over to Alex after. I'm starting my Toastmaster journey, doing the presentation pathway one level at a time. Thanks, Tony. Right. So what I'd like you to do after this evening's presentation is whatever your key takeaway is, try to apply metaphors across the different speech that you're giving. It could be part of your pathways journey, or it could be just part of a speech that you're giving in your club or workplace or some conversation that you're trying to have with your family member. So it could be an informative speech, a ceremonial speech, persuasive speech, or an evaluation. So try to fit in metaphors into the speech. And the toolkits that we've shared with you today has a lot of metaphors that you can just extensively use across a wide variety of settings. So that would be a good place to start with. And then obviously the internet is an ocean. You can find a lot more applications and examples of metaphors and other figures of speech. So the key takeaway, I believe, today is metaphors help in giving clarity when you're trying to convey, especially an abstract concept to an audience. And it actually taps into that brain power, which can hold memory of your speech and your key message, even after a long time after the speech was given. And especially trying to tap into the intentional usage of kinds of metaphors that we have, visual concepts, conceptual, and the extended versions of metaphors, or extended categories of metaphors with purpose might make your speech more impactful. And please feel free to extensively, exhaustively use the toolkit that we've given you, and you're your own quality control person. So figure out what you find as cliches and try avoiding that, and try also avoiding mixed metaphors, which I mean, that is a very subjective concept, yes. My mixed metaphor that I try to avoid might not be the same kind of mixed metaphor that you try to avoid. So it is your own personal preference, but keep it fresh and more relatable to the audience. And yes, so if there's any questions, we're happy to engage in a chat. And as always, if just reflect on today's session and find where you can apply the key takeaways that you received from today's session. Any questions, you can write to me or Alex here, and we'll be able to sort of give you the material that you need or help you out with any questions that you have. Always happy to help. So may your next speech paint 1,000 words. You see what I did there, right there? Yeah, so trying to stick to the theme of this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Janet, did you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask you, you kind of mentioned it about avoiding cliches and making up new images. And the cliches are like figures of speech are like well understood, especially by people with English as their first language. But we've got a lot of people with English as a second language in our club. So I'm thinking, is it better to use the sort of familiar ones or to create new ones that create a clear picture in somebody's head?
I would say, I mean, a combination of both would be great. So the best way to actually assimilate into, I speak 12 languages, just throwing it out there, a simple flex.
Nice.
The best way to assimilate into, of have a sense of belonging with whoever you're talking with,
Yeah.
some would say is try to speak their language. But given that we're all speaking English here, the best way to relate with
I'm
someone
not real
is
good at Vietnamese or Malaysian.
the best way to um, eh, have a soul-to-soul connection is try to use the figures of speech that a native speaker would use in their context, and also share what you bring to the table as well. So I think it's a combination of both, as opposed to either trying to appear as an insider or try to completely ostracize yourself. It's you bringing your inherent self at the same time connecting with the other person. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah. So I did pay attention to what they talk about. And then, so like yesterday's meeting, we talked about the year of the horse being the Chinese New Year. And so one person sort of interpreted that as strength and courage and things, loyalty that horses have. And another person took it to be Melbourne Cup winners.
Well, yes, that tends to happen too. So yeah, that's a very interesting thing. I wouldn't have thought about it. But I think adding context there in speeches or when we say something might help. But I think it also opens up a nice avenue to have a conversation, right? From one side, I think this person can share what actually the Year of the Firehouse stands for and what are the key takeaways and why the Year of the Firehouse is the Year of the Firehouse and how it comes only once in so many years and so on. It's a good avenue to share that philosophy and cultural tidbits as well. And the other person also tends to take away the obsession Melbourne has with horse racing. So, which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Thank
that
you.
was in Adelaide, but yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's still something that we celebrate locally, but at the same time, there are events that we celebrate nationally or we celebrate even now globally. Thank you once again, Peter. I'm going to leave it for now. And if you want to reach out to Peter, by all means, you have his email on screen. He's very approachable. And he also has his division contest on the 1st of March. If you're in the city and happy to join him, it's at the library at the dock. Other things to share, I have a metaphor on my screen. It's the compass within, and it refers to our annual conference. Sue, I know that you've been very busy and you didn't want to say anything, but are you still around to tell us something about the conference?
Absolutely. The conference is coming up on the 15th to the 17th of May, and we would so love to see all of you there and come and join us because you need to find your true north and shift your momentum. So log into that link that is in the chat box and hope to see you all there. It'll be really well worth coming along to.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Sue, for sharing. And Sue is our conference chair, and she takes care of all the organization. She has great speakers lined up. Micah is coming over. If you don't know Micah, he is the outstanding speaker who won the hearts of the audience through a screen. Exactly what we're trying to do tonight and what Peter has been trying to do from 7 p.m. Knowing that I have to go to another meeting right now, I'm going to have to call this to an end. But I appreciate everyone's participation. I am quite pleased to see how many people showed up on a Thursday evening. I hope you got something from today's session. I definitely did. If I was to share my personal favorite metaphor, I always go with nature because you can never fail. So I always think of nature, trees growing, seeds being planted, and then build on from there. Now, I hope you have your own go-to metaphor, be it sports or being literature, anything. And I hope that helps you build better speeches, present better in front of the audience, and be memorable. Thank you, everyone. I leave you with this, and I hope I'll see you at the conference and at other education series.
Thank you so much, Peter and Alex. Fantastic.